Welcome back to the Sitting Duck, a Town of Duck podcast. It's been a few weeks since our last episode, but today we have a special edition of the podcast because we enlisted your help in coming up with today's questions. Joining us today is Police Chief Jeff Ackerman. Chief Ackerman began his career in law enforcement in 1998. And before we get started, I'd like to say welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm really excited about this. We've got a lot of great questions. It's really cool that our community is interested in the policing of duck. And before we get started with that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Moved to the Outer Banks in the early 90s from the Washington, D.C. area. Grew up in Nags Head. My parents owned a small oceanfront motel. So it was a really interesting upbringing on the Outer Banks, getting to meet seasonal visitors every week and running a small family business. So certainly introduced me to all kinds of different things and taught me you could fix about anything. And that was before we had YouTube. So let's see. Started my policing career with town of Nags Head. I was actually offered two jobs the same day, one in Rocky Mount and one in Nags Head. I chose the job in Nags Head. I think that was the right decision, although I often wonder how my life would be different if I had chosen the other way. But made for a wonderful last 27 years in my career. I went from Nags Head to the Dare County Sheriff's Office, where I was able to run the Sheriff's Therapeutic Wilderness Program and was also a Dare officer. It was just a great opportunity to work with troubled youth. We went on camping trips, took them as far as the Grand Canyon on several occasions. So really was a wonderful time. And then when Duck Incorporated, saw an opportunity to come up here and get in on the ground floor. So I was the 7th officer hired at the time. Makes my employee number 007. So that's pretty unique. And 21 years later, I've been here. I've held every position in the police department from patrol officer before being named chief just over 4 years ago.
Well, and that's such a great way to kind of grow. You know, you start essentially from the entry level and work your way up. So that's kind of neat that you've got that resume of experience.
Very lucky to have had folks along the way that helped to get me ready. My predecessor certainly took me under his wing. Made sure that I got the training and the networking I needed to do the job. So fortunate to have had people help me along the way and be a very supportive town, supportive community.
That's great. And I think I can speak for everyone in the town that we're a very fortunate town to have that type of team behind us. So let's jump in. I would like to learn more about the wilderness. That's really neat. I didn't know about that.
It was an incredible opportunity. I'll give you the 10-second version. Essentially, we got funding from the state through it was called the Juvenile Justice Prevention Council, and we took juvenile court counselors handle all the at-risk youth cases, undisciplined youth, different criminal problems like that, and then they would refer them to the program. So we would take them on weekend trips. We used a lot of different law enforcement officers to come along as chaperones. And we'd frequently go to Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. We'd take everything that we needed for the weekend camping trip, and the kids would participate in every aspect of it, from setting up the camp to cooking the meals to cleaning. We'd do horseback riding, canoeing, fishing, you name it, just to give them an experience that they otherwise wouldn't have. So it was just phenomenal for them, but we as mentors were the ones that really got the real enjoyment out of it. And to this day, I run into a lot of those kids in the grocery store or throughout town and see them doing well. So I know that it worked. It was a great program. Unfortunately, it lost funding. And the current sheriff has done a great job. He's built it into the Camp Salt. This is known today. And they do a similar thing at the Alpine Tower facility in Kettleville Hills, but do a lot of mentoring for at-risk youth there and summer camps and things. So really incredible opportunities.
It sounds like it.
For youth.
That's awesome. And it's great that you still see them and can see that they're doing well. That's special. So You ready to get into this?
Sure.
All right. Like I said, we have a lot of great questions that were submitted from the community. And something we've mentioned, I think, in every podcast we've done so far is that Duck is very small. We are a very unique town in that we have just over 700 full-time residents. And that being said, the first question that was submitted is, how is policing in Duck different from other similarly sized towns in the country?
Well, that's a great question to kick us off with. As you said, Duck is extremely unique. Maybe not unique in terms of other coastal or mountain communities in North Carolina that face the same issues, although we certainly have some uniqueness to us. But when you have a year-round population of 700, but yet in the summer at peak season, we can swell from 25 to 30,000 people in town. We have a ton of shops in our town, so we have people coming and going all through the day, eating in our restaurants, shopping in our shops, participating in the outdoor activities we have. So we try to deal with what comes with that. Most departments that have a similar population, especially our peak population, would probably have double the amount of officers we have. So we have to adjust to that with the staff that we have. So we are fixed at 14 sworn officers. I don't see that changing drastically anytime in the future. And we, unlike a lot of places, I hear this often from folks that have visited in New Jersey along their shore, that they bring in seasonal officers to help. In North Carolina, the training and certification standards are the same for a full-time police officer as a part-time officer. So it isn't practical to bring in people seasonally. There isn't a pool of applicants to fill that. And I'm often asked, why don't you bring in part-time officers from other agencies? And primary reason is the time we're busy is the exact same time that their primary agencies are busy. So there really is no resource for bringing in part-time officers. The other thing I'd point out is huge challenge for us is every week our population almost turns over in its entirety. So in a traditional community, if you were dealing with, say, a speeding problem, and you knew a particular place, maybe a school zone where speeding occurred every day, officers would focus on that. They'd go out, they'd do proactive enforcement, they'd write citations, and the community would know that that's an area they're going to be held accountable in. The police are going to be there. Here, officers could go out and write 500 speeding tickets in a week, and the turnover, the new folks that come in the next week will have no idea what happened the week before. So the problem just perpetuates. Every week, the same things come up, and have to find a way to use the resources we have to try to address those problems in the best way that we can. So education, you would probably hear me say that a lot today, but education is our greatest tool. And like I said, I know that some of the other questions you might have will give me an opportunity to talk more about that as well.
And you kind of mentioned the nuances that come with a seasonal population versus the typical year-round population, but with how hectic the summers can be, how does the Duck Police Department balance that? How do you balance the hectic summers with the comparatively quiet off-season?
You know, it's funny. A lot of people say to me, it must be great working here in the winter. You don't have to do anything. And it always gives me a chance to chuckle. The work never stops. Just like any police department, we're a 365-day-a-year operation. What changes for us is our focus. So in the summer, call volume goes up. We have obviously more people, which equals more problems. In the winter, we have less people, but we have over 3,000 homes that are in weekly rental programs that we know sit vacant the most of the off-season. So our focus changes to that, to protecting those homes, to knowing that they're vulnerable, using the tools and resources we have to make sure that the property owners know that their homes are safe. So like I said, the work never stops. The focus just changes.
And you kind of touched on something, with breaking and enterings. Those tend to be more common in the off-season, correct?
Traditionally, yes.
And so with that, though, I think this would be a good way to plug in the off-season property checks that you guys offer. If no one knew, the Duck Police Department does offer this program. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And this has evolved a little bit over time. So initially what we did is solicit anybody who wanted their property checked to put a request in, and we would go out and check that property for them. The problem became, as I said, we have over 3,000 homes, and there was no way to individually check each one of them. So we shifted gears, tried to find a better way to do it. So now what we do is officers are assigned a set number of homes to check on every given day. So they will go out at random. They will check a series of properties on a particular street. They'll log those so that we have a pin map. We know what's been checked, where we've been, where we need to focus efforts. And throughout the season, we usually make our rounds several times through the entire town, checking homes, making sure they're secure. So a lot of calls we get in the off-season are, I saw on my Ring camera that an officer was at my front door, and I love getting those calls because I can explain, yes, we sure were. We were there making sure your door and your windows and your home was secure. It's a great program we have.
Is there a way that the public can see those calls that you respond to, and so they can have a better understanding of the issues being addressed?
Great question. So we've got two methods that to keep our community informed about what's going on. So every Monday we publish a weekly blotter, and we focus on the larger issues, more issues that the public would be most concerned with seeing there. We post particular data for other things we do. But monthly, we post what's called a Chief's Report, and that comes directly from our dispatch system, and it lists the exact number of calls in any particular topic. So you might see there that we performed 600 property checks during the month, but you'd also see that we responded to 2 domestic violence calls. While it doesn't give you particularly specific data about a particular call, it does show you the trends, what types of calls we're responding to, throughout the year, and you can see how that changes. And that's generally posted very close to the first day of each month.
Knowing how policing is in the off-season with, these homes sitting vacant, how common or uncommon are breaking and enterings in Duck?
Interesting question. So in the 2010s, breaking and enterings, not just in Duck, but in the Outer Banks, had really reached epidemic level. Flat screen televisions and electronics were the primary target. To this day, I can't say where all these televisions went, but we know that thousands of televisions were stolen throughout the Outer Banks and over a several-year period. So it really was an opportunity for not just Duck, but communities in the Outer Banks to figure out a better way to do things. But we also knew that we had a greater responsibility to our community here in Duck. So we launched. My predecessor should be credited with finding the funding to launch the first automated license plate reader system on the Outer Banks. Was launched here in Duck, and our geography really lends itself to that because there's only one way in and one way out of Duck. So that was a game changer for us. We were able to use that technology to pinpoint known and unknown suspects in these crimes. The ones that were known, we were alerted when they entered the town. It was almost certain that they were here for no good. We were able to find them, make sure they weren't breaking into anything, and let them know we knew they were here. It also let us work with other agencies who had known suspects. We could enter them into what's called a hot list so that we'd be alerted if they were here. We'd also, if we had a break-in, we were able to use that technology to pinpoint down a particular moment in time and see which vehicles came and went. And as you mentioned, most of those breaking and enterings occurred at night and in the off-season. So as you can imagine, at 2 a.m., in January, there aren't a whole lot of vehicles coming and going in Duck. So it wasn't very difficult to pinpoint the suspects in those crimes. So that was a real game changer in how we dealt with breaking and enterings. And then the other thing was the advent of home security cameras. That probably is the single most valuable piece of technology that we have access to. Homeowners see something suspicious, they immediately call us. We have a portal where they can download that video right to the officer to see. And that really has been a deterrent for breaking and entering. So to answer your question, in the 2010s, absolutely breaking and enterings were common. We've now reached a point where breaking and enterings are the exception, not the rule. We see very few of them throughout the year, which really lends itself to successes. Going through all that also let us strengthen our collaboration with other departments. We meet frequently. We share data frequently. We share known suspects. So there's a great working relationship, and that's benefited agencies all across the Outer Banks to combat that problem.
And just to be clear, those ALPRs, those are not red light cameras or speeding cameras, correct?
No, not at all. Not at all. There's a lot of misconceptions about what ALPR technology does. It strictly takes a picture of a license plate at that moment in time. It doesn't take pictures of the occupants of the vehicle. We don't use that data to track people's movements. We're simply looking at who's coming and who's going. And any time we use that, it has to be used very specifically to state statute and departmental policy. It has to be used for a known criminal justice purpose. So it's very closely guarded information. We don't retain it for more than 30 days. So we're not retaining this on a long-term basis.
So the next question that I have here submitted says, the policing policy in Duck seems to boil down to, if you aren't bothering anyone, we will leave you alone. I wholeheartedly agree with that strategy. What are the Duck Police Department officers told to look out for?
I appreciate that question. I don't know if I would boil it down to quite that simplistic, but I appreciate the statement and the question, especially the agreeance with the strategy. What I would say to that is we don't turn a blind eye to crime, but we are very cognizant that Duck is a tourism-based community. We rely heavily on that economy here. It's not to say that we allow people to just go and do as they please, but as I mentioned earlier, the question about the weekly turnover, while enforcement is important, education also is very effective. So we try to use education where it's appropriate, but there are certainly some non-negotiables in Duck. We're not going to tolerate any violence or disruptive behavior. Noise violations are something we frequently respond to, as well as intoxicated behavior in the in-season rather. Speeding, careless and reckless driving while intoxicated, theft, property crimes. To me, those are all non-negotiables, and we'll hold people accountable as appropriate. But where we can, we do know people are here. We want them to have a good time. As any of us know, sometimes when you're in that mindset, you might make a poor decision, or you may do something that you wouldn't normally do at home. So we're empathetic to that, but we have a job to do, and we won't hesitate to do it when we have to do it.
Right. I like that answer. That being said, what would you say is the biggest challenge to policing Duck moving forward?
That's a question I get asked a lot. It's also one I think about a lot because it goes into all the strategic planning that centers around budget preparation, goal setting, training, everything. So there isn't one, but there are two, and they're very unique from one another. So I think long term, the biggest challenge on one side will be traffic volume on Duck Road. As Corolla continues to grow, Duck will remain the primary thoroughfare to get there. The Mid-Currituck Bridge, I think we all hope will get built eventually, but we've all been hearing that for many, many, many years, and we haven't seen it. So Duck Road was never designed to carry the volume that it carries. So we see a huge volume of vehicles travel through here every day. And Duck is a vibrant, walkable, rideable community. We pride ourselves on that. But when you take large traffic volumes and mix it with folks on low-speed vehicles or street-legal golf carts, bikes and e-bikes, pedestrians, people not knowing exactly where they're headed. It really is a recipe for trouble, and it is a difficult thing to address. And the primary reason is duck isn't responsible for the road. It belongs to the North Carolina Department of Transportation. So we have very limited opportunities to enact regulations rather that may address some of the things we see. So we're really at the mercy sometimes of the legislature. The other issue that really does keep me up at night is staffing. And this is not a problem unique, one, to the Outer Banks or the nation. Staffing in police departments it really has reached a critical level. When you add in the high cost of living here, it really makes it difficult to deal with staffing. And while we are fully staffed right now, I always worry that an officer will leave. And we're not losing officers to other departments. We're losing officers that are either leaving the profession or leaving the area, seeking out more affordable living.
Kind of piggybacking off that, the next question that goes along with that is, how does the Duck Police Department attract and retain officers? The area is very unique given the amount of people in the summer compared to the off-season. It's a relatively small area to patrol, and the cost of living is rather expensive. So what does the Duck Police Department do to combat that?
It's a great question. I would say most of the work that all of us at the Duck Police Department do is centered around this particular issue. The primary way we combat recruitment and retention and really put a higher focus on retention, frankly, because we put so much investment in the officers and want them to be here for a long time, is we've built a supportive work culture. One that really centers on life-work balance. And I'm very careful to say life-work, not the other way around, because we understand it's a job. When the officers are here, we expect 110% out of them. But we also completely understand that when they're home, they want to be with their families. They want to enjoy everything that the Outer Banks has to offer. So we try to promote that and understand that they have a life outside of work. The other thing is we've really built a robust culture around officer wellness and particularly mental health. Most of our officers didn't start here. They've come from other places, larger cities, and they come with a lot of the trauma that has occurred in their career. So we're attuned to that. We've built a great partnership with a local clinician that is on board with us to offer training, education, and one-on-one sessions with our officers when they need it. So I think that helps. The other huge factor in our ability to retain and recruit is community support. Duck is so fortunate to have a community that loves its police officers, that believes in policing, understands what we do. Not to say we don't make mistakes, but they give us the benefit of the doubt and they allow us to look into it. And where we're wrong, we'll say we're wrong. But we appreciate that support we get from our town council as well. A few other things we do. We have a very robust career development plan, which does help keep officers. What we're seeing, a real trend in law enforcement, is officers aren't chasing dollars as much as they're chasing culture. So put a big focus on that, and so far it's working, knock on wood.
And you mentioned something that actually ties in nicely to one of the questions that we received. When you talk about community support and the community supporting, what you do in policing Duck, they like to be involved. They like to see what's going on, know what's going on. We've talked about transparency, but someone has actually asked about doing ride-alongs. They've done ride-alongs previously, and they want to know, is that something that's available?
That's a great question. Yes, but in limited circumstances. So as you can imagine, ride-alongs are a high liability area. So while we offer them, we have to limit them to residents and property owners. It isn't the intent to exclude visitors, But we simply we couldn't keep up with the volume of requests that come in, and especially during the in-season. Our officers are fairly busy, and they need to focus on that. So we try to schedule ride-alongs outside of the primary season. But yes, any residents or property owners, as well as any members of our community that have an interest in exploring a career in policing, we would welcome them to contact us, and we can go over opportunities for ride-alongs.
Someone asked about the personal safety session that they attended earlier this year. They found it very informative, and they want to know, are there more community involvement sessions planned?
Well, funny you should ask. My staff and I have been discussing this quite a bit lately. One of the goals I had this year was to really try to get us back into the community. It's not to say we're not out there every day, but in a more formal way. So a couple of the things we've talked about and we're going to do, first is want to hold regular meetings. I'm not sure what I'm going to call them yet, but they'll probably center around my favorite thing, which is coffee. So we'll probably have some kind of coffee with a cop or coffee with the command staff or something along those lines. But then more to your question, we are looking at some sessions. Personal safety certainly is one of those. The other things we've been asked for our business community is to do more with shoplifting and fraud prevention. So I have an officer that is particularly passionate about that topic. He is working on a plan to deliver some training like that. So I would say stay tuned. These are some things we're definitely working on, and as we get it out, we'll certainly get that information out to the public.
And I know you and I have talked about a little bit more of a presence on social media, so definitely stay tuned for that. You mentioned low-speed vehicles earlier, and this is kind of a hot topic as there was an incident a few weeks ago. But the question that I have here is, what is the plan for enforcing current regulations on low-speed vehicles, specifically child restraints, car seats, seatbelt use, and the number of passengers? I've witnessed sidewalk use, numerous unsecured children, toddlers, and infants, either alone on seats or held on laps, vehicles with passengers stacked on one another, and unlicensed drivers.
The first thing I want to say to that is I will be the first to say we have not done as good a job as we could do with that, and I promise that we will improve. Anybody that's ridden through town over the last several weeks no doubt has seen the officers really focusing on the low-speed vehicle issue. We've dramatically increased the number of traffic stops. It's not to say that this always hasn't been an issue that's kept me up at night. While, as I mentioned earlier, we're fully staffed, we went through a time over the summer where we were down effectively 50% of our patrol staff, which really cut into our ability to offer the level of service I know we need. Fortunately, and that was a combination of officers that had been injured, that were out on long-term leave, and the loss of several longtime officers who left the profession. I could say that we're back fully staffed. Two of those staff members are still in training and won't be fully released till sometime early next year. But having said that, it's certainly not an excuse, but it has hampered our efforts to do a lot of the things that we really know that we need to focus on. What I want to say about that issue is it is a major issue. It is a hot topic issue, and it should be a hot topic issue. We're dealing with, and I've made this statement to a number of folks lately. I don't know that there's another community in North Carolina that's seen the proliferation of LSVs that Duck has seen. I've talked to chiefs at other coastal and mountain communities, and while they say they're present, most of their communities are laid out differently than ours. There isn't a central point where they're converging. Or a central road that goes through their community. So we're seeing 100% of these vehicles come through our village. And we've gone from only a few on the street to having, at last count, there are over 12 vendors that rent these vehicles. One vendor has over 200 in their inventory for the Outer Banks. So when you take LSVs, mix them with golf carts, mix them with e-bikes and everything else. As I said earlier, it is a serious issue. A lot of folks have said ban them. Unfortunately, in the state of North Carolina, the legislature has given the town no authority to enact any regulation to ban or limit the use of low-speed vehicles. So the town's hands are tied in that respect. The other things I want to say about LSVs is they are vehicles. I know, Kay, you posted a great graphic, created a great graphic recently that laid out that. And it really is that simple. Any regulation that would apply to the car you're driving down the road applies to that low-speed vehicle. So seatbelts are required. Child safety restraints are required. Driver's license is required. The way you operate it, everything from turn signals to where it's driven, have to adhere to the motor vehicle code. So one of the issues we're able to see, and I say we, police department and the public, as we see these vehicles drive down the road, we notice the violations. We see the children on parents' laps. We see the folks with no seatbelts. What I hate to tell you is that we're seeing the exact same violations in vehicles that are driving down the road. We're just not seeing them. They're not as transparent as they are in LSVs. That's, again, certainly no excuse for that behavior, but that is a fact. That is what we're seeing. So to get back to the question, what are we going to do about it? So we are definitely have asked the sergeants, deputy chief, to see that we substantially increase our enforcement efforts on these vehicles. We've tried, despite, I know, Kay, you've put out education ad nauseum over this issue. We've met with the vendors that rent these cars. We've met with homeowners. We've really, there is no higher level of education we can do, and yet we're still seeing violations. So what we're left with is having to go out and ticket violations. And is not something a lot of people are going to be happy about. And it does go back to what I said earlier about, week to week people maybe didn't know that we ticketed 20 carts the week prior, but I can't just sit by and with the worry that a child is injured or a family loses a loved one because somebody's improperly operating an LSV on our roads. So what I would say is this is your warning. We are going to be out there. We are going to be enforcing this issue. For those that are using LSVs and renting them, just don't let yourself fall into a false sense of security. Just because it's a 25-mile-an-hour road doesn't mean that the cars around you aren't dangerous. If there's a rear-end collision, an SUV has a rear-end collision with an LSV, the damage is going to be substantial. So I ask that you just keep that in mind, follow the regulations, make sure your children are in child safety seats, make sure you wear your seat belts, use your turn signals, and just be smart about how you operate them.
All of this has been super great. I love all these questions that the community has submitted. It was a great conversation, and it demonstrates right there how much the community really appreciates what you all do and how invested they are. So thanks for hearing those and answering those. And there is one more question that I'm really excited to hear the answer to. You can't have an interview with the chief and not ask, what is the most unusual call you've had at the Duck Police Department?
I don't know, 21 years, that's tough to narrow that down. I'll use this as an opportunity to tell you what most unusual call is, but I'll also use this as an opportunity to remind folks that while Duck is a small, unique, safe community, we're not immune from the things that every city in America sees. We just see it very less frequently, which is a blessing. But as far as most unique calls, I'm going to tell you two because they're both hilarious in my mind. But the one that sticks out is the most unusual call was a call at Sunset Grill. This was probably 15 years ago. We got called because a restaurant patron had gone in and seen the lobster tank that's right in the lobby with the fresh live lobsters and decided that they needed to set those lobsters free. So they stole several lobsters out of the tank and proceeded to walk out on the boardwalk, the pier right there in front, and release those lobsters into the Sound. Unbeknownst to them, that's brackish water, which is not native to cold water lobsters, and unfortunately the lobsters quickly passed away. But that was certainly probably the most unusual. Maybe in their mind they thought they were doing something good, but it didn't end up that way. And I'll just quickly tell you another one, which just has always stood out to me as the oddest experience I've had in Duck. Many years ago, we would patrol the beach on ATVs, and one night, late at night, probably 2 a.m, I was driving down the beach. There wasn't a soul out there, and off in the distance, I saw a figure. And as I got closer and closer, I realized this was a person standing right in the surf line. And I continued, had my headlights on, continued right up, and person never moved to the point where I was right on top of them, pulled up right to them, and realized it was a man standing completely naked, holding a glass of wine, enjoying the moonlight. It was just a very surreal experience for me. I usually somebody comes with headlights in that situation, the person would flee or leave. This person didn't.
Wow.
And let's just say it was an interesting encounter. And there was some business to be handled after that, but those two certainly sent as unique experiences.
And I'm sure we could do a whole episode on unusual calls, especially, with the type of community we have with, a seasonal transient crowd. I'm sure there's lots of interesting things that occur. And again, that's actually a good segue because, like you said, you post weekly blotters. So if you ever want to stay abreast on what is going on, what kind of police calls there are, check out our website. And every Monday, you will find what happened the previous week. So that being said, I think this was great. I appreciate your time. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Just would say thank you, Kay. It's an honor to work with you. You do wonderful things to help make sure the public's aware of what we do at the police department. We appreciate that. I know that we've talked about some things to come. I'm excited about some of those ideas that you'll be rolling out. So thank you, and everyone stay tuned for some good things.
Yeah. And, just on a personal note, if you happen to see an officer out in town, say hi. Tell them you listen to the podcast. Get to know these officers. They want to meet you. You're part of the community just as they are. So thank you for listening to the Sitting Duck podcast. Make sure you like the episode, subscribe so you know when the latest episodes come out, and share it on your social media so more people know about it. And for the latest on what's happening in the town of Duck, visit www.townofduck.com.